The challenge around climate is around first changing mindset and then changing people's behaviors. And so, getting people to change their actions and behaviors is something that we need to talk about. And one useful arrow in our quiver of kind of tools we might bring to the table is behavioral economics. We'd be hard pressed to find a better person to talk to us about this topic than Dave Thompson. He's a seasoned researcher in this space, and he's completed 3 postdoctoral fellowships at the University of Waterloo, Defense Research and Development Canada, and the University of Toronto. And he leads the Experimentation and Choice Architecture team at BEworks, where they test and implement behavioral tactics and nudges. Please join me in welcoming Dave Thompson to the screen. Dave?
Thanks a lot, Jay. I'm just going to share my screen here, and hopefully everyone will be able to see my slides. Okay. Great. So as Jay mentioned, I want to give you guys a little bit of insight into the human psychology around sustainable behavior change. So I want to tell you about thinking about changing behavior of individual citizens, designing solutions that can get people to do things differently in their everyday lives that would support combating climate change. And I'll give you a couple of examples of some key psychological barriers that prevent people from following through with the things that they say they'd like to do. A lot of climate change efforts, public-facing efforts, have focused largely on driving climate change awareness. And this makes sense. If we look in the figure here, we can see that there's substantial variability in different countries around the world in people's awareness of the issue of climate change and global warming. And we can take a look at a few examples of what these campaigns look like in the efforts to increase global awareness of climate change. Some of them, like this one here, are really trying to put the onus of control on people, saying that there are things we can do to help combat climate change. But the suggestions are very general. Conserve electricity, recycle, which maybe isn't such a good idea after the talk that we just heard, or walk instead of driving. Some campaigns, they don't provide any behavioral actions at all, like this one here. They simply try to evoke an emotional response from people, showing you what could be lost if global warming were to continue on its current path. And other campaigns get a little bit more creative, like this one here from World Wildlife Fund, showing an individual going through sort of a reverse evolution to be able to live in the world that we would eventually be in if we continued on our current path. So climate change awareness campaigns are important, and when they're successful, they don't just drive awareness, but they actually get people not just to know about the issue, but to accept the issue and to empathize with the issue. So here's a study showing that in a survey of North Americans, they weren't just aware of climate change. Around 70% are actually agreeing with statements such as, we're using up energy supplies too fast, and I'm very worried about the environment. Okay, so awareness campaigns can work to drive not just awareness, but acceptance and agreement with the issue. But awareness and acceptance of climate change is really just, it's a first step. And in order to fight climate change, what we really need is behavior change, which is what I want to talk to you about. Okay, does awareness drive behavior change? It's a very simple question. Well, awareness definitely drives behavior change intentions. So here's some data showing that in a 2018 poll of Americans, 20% said that they intended or were likely to buy an electric vehicle for their next vehicle purchase. So if our intentions are a good predictor of our behavior, then what percentage of new vehicle sales in the US in 2019 do we think were electric? 20% maybe? No, only 5% of new vehicle sales were actually EVs that year. And this is just an example that to make the broader point that our intentions do not necessarily lead to behavior change. So why is this the case? Why do our intentions not translate into actions? Well, there's this very simple phenomenon that we can all kind of relate to in behavioral psychology called the intention action gap. First, we become aware of an issue like climate change, and if the campaigns work quite well, we may form intentions to change our behavior. But oftentimes something gets lost along the way, and we don't actually follow through on those intentions with new actions, like stopping using non-renewable plastics, or plastics that are perhaps expensive to recycle. And the reason we don't always follow through on our intentions is because of cognitive biases. We have these biases that prevent us from executing on our goals and our behavioral intentions. Behavioral economics, which I'll get into a little bit, is basically just the study of these psychological biases and how to overcome them. Okay, so what am I talking about? What is a cognitive bias? Well, rather than get into the theory of any of this, I just want you to consider this following question. Imagine that I'm offering you either $100 right now, today, each one of you, or you can wait a month and I'll give you $120. This is a hypothetical, by the way. I'm not actually going to give you this money, but try and imagine these two options. Which would you rather receive? I'll give you $100 right now, or you can wait a month and I'll give you 120. So just think about which option you would choose. Now, if you're like most people, when these two choices are given to them, most people say, "I'll just take the $100 right now." Um, Economically, this is not a great choice because it's free money either way. You may as well get the maximum amount of money being offered to you. But the vast majority of people, when given this choice, prefer to have a smaller amount of money now as opposed to a larger amount of money later. And this is just meant to show you that we are all very present biased. And present bias is one of those psychological phenomena that gets in the way of us following through with our intentions. We often make decisions that benefit us now, even though they may harm us or others or the planet in the near or distant future. This is a big problem for climate change action because we're often asking people to sacrifice things now in order to realize benefits in the future. Think about asking people to give up their time in the morning to ride their bike or walk to work instead of drive their car, to give up their energy by sorting their compost and their recycling and their garbage instead of just throwing everything into the garbage bin, or being a little bit too warm or a little bit too cold instead of over consuming electricity in order to benefit financially on your bill a month or two from now. So if we want individual citizens to um, engage in sustainable behaviors, we have to overcome this tendency for everyone to be very immediate focused, very present biased. And one of the ways we can do that is simply by making sustainable behaviors rewarding now in the present, not just rewarding in the future or the distant future. So here's a kind of a fun example of what this looks like. This is just a recycling game in China where people are throwing all their garbage and recycling all into a single waste disposal source. And instead of trying to get people to take the time and the effort to properly dispose of waste, they've turned it into a game, a fun game where people actually go and use these controls to sort the garbage and recycling. Now, this is kind of a silly example, but it's meant to make the point that if you can make something very rewarding now, people are much more likely to do it than if you simply give them the promise that it will pay off in the long run. Let's talk about one more of these cognitive biases that we're all, I'm sure, quite familiar with. It's technically called social norm bias, but I could simply say that we are heavily influenced by what we see other people doing. And I don't think anyone would disagree with this statement. But more to the point, we also want other people to see our pro-social behaviors. And this is a challenge when it comes to sustainable action because Many climate change actions that individual citizens can take are invisible to others. You can't see that other people are making responsible decisions, and you can't signal to others that you're doing this. The image here is from a residential street in California. And just to show you how powerful this idea is, it's been well documented that people who are installing solar panels on their homes will actually sometimes install them on the shady sides of their roofs, which is not very energy efficient, simply because that is the side that faces their neighbors, faces their street. And they want other people to see that they're doing their part. And when they do that, what it also does is it signals to others. Other people on the street see that their neighbors have have solar panels, and what you see is that the neighbors and other surrounding homes also start to solar panels also start to crop up on those homes. So social norms are very powerful. We do what we see other people doing, and we do things pro-socially more often when we can show others that we are doing these things. So we need to leverage this social norm bias when trying to get individual citizens to act responsibly. And the way we need to do that is by making the invisible visible. Here's an example of how this has been attempted in the domain of residential electricity consumption. Companies have started creating these reports that appear on energy bills in North America, showing you how your consumption stacks up against the consumption of your neighbors. And so what this does is it makes your consumption visible to others, and it allows you to see that other people are maybe not consuming as much as you thought. These types of social comparisons have been very effective in actually reducing people's home electricity consumption. Much more effective than simply pleading with people that they should consume less in order to fight global warming. The last of these biases that I'll tell you about is loss aversion bias. We actually experience the pain of loss about twice as intensely as we feel the joy of gains. And what this means is that we try really hard to avoid giving things up. And when it comes to sustainable behaviors, this is a really big challenge because many climate change actions are actually asking us to give things up, something we really don't like doing. Imagine giving up the comfort and the time you have in the morning driving to work in order to subject yourself to the inconvenience of public transportation or walking to work in a cold Canadian winter. I'm based in Toronto, so imagine giving up your comfort at home to reduce electricity, or giving up your favorite cup of coffee because it's not being sourced sustainably. So we really don't like giving things up and losing things, and yet a lot of climate change action campaigns are asking us to do just that. In order for people to actually follow through, we need to fight this loss aversion bias. And the way we need to do that is by making people feel like they're gaining something in their lives, not losing something. And I've got a simple example just to show you what I mean by that. Imagine we were trying to get people to adopt vegetarian diets because meat consumption and production is really not good for the environment. Think about how we could frame these healthy vegetarian food options. A typical way is to call things vegetarian, call them meat-free. But this implies loss. You're asking people to subtract something from their lives. Instead, if you use rewarding sounding terms like indulgent chickpea curry or creamy pasta, people will be more likely to want to choose those options, because if you feel like you're adding something indulgent and luxurious into your diet, not simply subtracting. So again, if we want people to actually change their daily behaviors, we need to combat this loss aversion and add something to people's lives. So there are many of these psychological barriers that affect our behavior and decision making from one moment to the next. These are three that feature prominently in sustainable action. We're very, very influenced and biased towards the present. We don't really like to do things now that benefit us or others later out in time. And so when designing solutions to change individual citizen behavior, we need to make the benefits of those actions felt right now in the present, not in the future. We need to leverage social norm influences. We do what we see others doing, and we like to signal to others what we are doing. So we need to make the invisible visible. We need to make it possible for others to see the decisions that we're making. And finally, we need to create solutions that aren't centered around subtracting from people's lives and triggering that loss aversion. Instead, we want to add something to people's lives. So, in essence, what I want you to think about is that fighting climate change at the individual citizen level, in large part, is about driving behavior change. And most people want to do their part. They have intentions. They want to do things that are better for the planet. So when you're designing solutions to try and combat climate change, think about going beyond the value propositions that this is good for the planet and instead consider these in the moment psychological barriers, the present bias, the social norms, the loss aversion that prevent people's intentions, which many of them already have, from turning into actions, which are necessary to actually fight against climate change. I'd like you to start by thinking over the next few days about your own behavior. Whenever you catch yourself doing something that wouldn't necessarily be in line with sustainable action, turning up your thermostat or getting a disposable coffee cup, pause for a second and think about why you're doing that. Is it because you are running short in time? Is it because, well, this is your habit, your routine, and it's something you don't want to give up? And when you're designing solutions, think about those types of phenomenon preventing everyone else's behavior. And if we can design solutions that overcome these barriers, we'll have a much greater chance of seeing individual citizens actually do the right things the way that they intend to do. Okay, so I will stop there and stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, David. That was a really terrific presentation, and it just goes to show how many tools that the students and the participants here have at their disposal: technology, science, politics, and now behavior. So this is a fascinating field, and I'm certainly going to look into it. So appreciate your time, and thank you for the presentation.